Hello and welcome to another episode of a Weekly Waypoint. Today we are playing Wipeout 2097, or as other people may know it, the Heathens, Wipeout XL. I don't know if it's got any other localized names, but those are the two that I know it under. We are continuing our exploration, of course, of the Wipeout franchise. This is the second game in the series, and a few things before we get underway. First of all, you'll notice, sorry, no music. Wipeout without the soundtrack is, you know, Diet Wipeout. It's not the same, obviously, but it uses this title specifically, and the ones going forward probably uses a lot of licensed music, so unfortunately I had to nip it in the bud. The next thing I want to throw out there before we get too far away from the start of this video is I'm going to throw out an epilepsy warning for the fifth track in this video, because it takes place during a thunderstorm, and oh boy does the screen flash white very, very often. You'll notice that this game is chock full of sponsorships and advertisements from the real world, so let me just add that other brands are available. And finally, I've also fixed the aspect ratio, so you're now looking at Wipeout as it was intended to be looked at. I don't know why I left it widescreen for the previous video. It's an error on my part, but hopefully it looks more akin to how it should look now. So yeah, first thing we'll talk about this week is the game itself. Wipeout 2097 is an evolution of its original counterpart, Wipeout, and this game introduces damage. So for those of you who didn't see last week's episode or don't know, the very first Wipeout game has no damage, so there's no pit stops like this one, because you literally cannot take damage and explode. Weapons were literally just kind of used to slow people down in that version of the game. And yeah, I don't know, if you had to ask me whether I preferred it with or without weapons, honestly, or without damage even, I'm kind of ambivalent. I would say maybe it's better to have damage because it can add to that, like, when you get the guy being like, shields low, and you're like, oh my god, I might hit a corner wrong and explode and throw away this entire race. It does add an element of, not stress, but, you know, it makes it more exciting for better or for worse. This game also looks nicer graphically speaking, if I do say so myself. The drawing is a little bit less intensive in terms of more of the world is rendered at once compared to its previous installment. Wipeout 3 actually does this even better. Wipeout 3, we'll see next week, I think it looks almost on par with a PS2 game. It's wild. This game is also a little bit less punishing in terms of if you so much as touch a wall you lose all of your momentum. In this game you can, it's difficult to do, but you can kind of skid along the edges of a wall. I don't know if that drains your energy or not, but it is a thing you can do. It is a thing I do sometimes in this video if you look out for it. And yeah, it helps you keep your momentum despite still touching the barrier. That being said, it is still pretty punishing. This game has a different variety of ships, I noticed. So, as I've been playing the different Wipeout games from across the entire franchise, I've noticed that the array of ships you get in this game are pretty much on par with the array of ships you get in the later games. Whereas the first game has the Pfizer ship, and then it has 3 different companies you can choose from as well, except they all pretty much look like Pfizer ships. So I know this is set like 100 years in the future to the previous game. I don't know if the story is that Pfizer just bought everyone out of business and consolidated all of those, and that's why we've got new, more interesting ships to race against in this one. But I've pretty much settled on Oricom as the company ship that I like to use. I don't know if I'm using these terms correctly, but it's what it is. I find the Oricom ship tends to have a pretty nice all-rounder kind of a build to it. It's not my favorite design in terms of visually, but as I say, it allows for a nice playstyle. It's funny, in last week's Weekly Waypoint, I used the box art for the thumbnail, and then I realised I'd actually used the Wipeout 2097 box art instead of a Wipeout 1 box art, and I realised this because I was looking at that ship going, wait a minute, that ship's not available in Wipeout 1. Wipeout 1 only had those singular long conal nose ships. It didn't have these kind of like twin-ass, railgun-looking-ass ships yet, because they were introduced in this game. So yeah, the impression I get is that Wipeout 2097 is probably the peak of the PlayStation 1 era. It's the one I hear the most talk about. It's the one I had as a kid. and overall it's just a nice little evolution on the overall series, and we're going to see an even bigger evolution next week with Wipeout 3, but will I like it as much as this one? Tune in to find out. Now, as for what I've been playing this week, boy do I have a story for you. So obviously I knew Dawntrail was coming out this week, and we'll get to that. I won't spoil anything, obviously, but before that I decided to pick up Dragon Quest XI-S Echoes of an Elusive Age. Era? I always forget if it's an elusive age or an elusive era. I feel like era would make more sense. I'm gonna go look it up. Okay, no, it is age. I have been saying it correctly. Anyway, yes, I did mention this on the last week's Weekly Waypoint, so I was playing some more of that. I was getting engrossed in that, and I knew that obviously Dawntrail would interrupt my playtime on that, so that was fine. When all that happened, that was absolutely fine. I've got to, where's Spain? What's that called? Gallopolis. I've got to Gallopolis and I've met Sylvando, and I forgot how fantastic of a character Sylvando is. It's funny because last week I mentioned, didn't I, that like I've basically, this is my third save file in Dragon Quest XI. Firstly, I played through the like 5-hour long demo, then secondly I played 25 hours of the game when it was on Game Pass, and now finally I've just bought it to own on Steam, so it's a different platform, a different save file. And so playing through that first 5 hours or so was honestly a little bit of a chore because I'm so familiar with the opening of this game now, and I was excited to get to the point where my memory started to get a little bit more blurry because I'd only played through it once like 2 years ago. And yeah, I've hit that point now, and it was nice to be like, oh yeah, I forgot that this is what's going on with Veronica, and I forgot that there's a whole thing with the prince in Gallopolis, and yeah, obviously not going to give any story details away here either. But it has been nice to slowly work my way through that again. That being said, it's still not the freshest experience out there, but it's also heartening to know that, you know, I got 25 hours in, not 80 hours in, so it's not like I'm super far behind where I left off on the previous platform. And truth be told, I get this weird cozy feeling, for want of a better term, just owning the game and having it installed on my external SSD, knowing I can just go and boot it up at any time, and it's not necessarily taking up a whole ton of space that I need to be careful about using for video storage. So while it may be a little while yet before I boot up the game again because of Dawntrail and another game I'm going to get to in a minute, it is nice to know that it's just there, it's just waiting for me whenever I want to pick it back up again. And also Dragon Quest XI does a really good job of being like, okay, last time you played, this was going on, our heroes were here, they were doing this, and here's why they got here, and that kind of thing. It's got a nice little 2-page story summary that's pretty dynamic for wherever you are in the game. It's quite impressive, actually. I know there are older Dragon Quest titles which do that as well. So yeah, then Dawntrail came out, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Dawntrail in terms of just general impressions and maybe story structure. So no spoilers, but if you really don't want to hear an absolute thing about Dawntrail, I will flash a time up on the screen now to tell you what time to jump to avoid all that. So Dawntrail is out in early access, although by the time you're hearing this it'll be in full release, and I'm sure I talked about this last time as well, but it's a farce, right, the early access thing. You pre-order the base game and you get early access. So from when I'm talking right now, which is Sunday, the game technically isn't out yet, but if you buy the game, you can then play the game. So it's out. It's just out. It's just PR talk. Some people have pointed out to me that it's a way of stopping the free trial players from being able to log in to kind of like save with the queues and stuff. So there is that, but other than that, yeah, it's just out. Anyway, I played it for 13 hours straight the day it came out. I haven't had as good of an expansion experience in terms of just playing for a new expansion and being really excited to see the new areas and interacting with my clan chat or FC chat or whatever, or guild chat or whichever game we're talking about, and just having a great time and being super immersed. I haven't had as good of an experience, if we're talking WoW, probably not since WoW Legion. I would say ESO Elsewhere was up on there as well in terms of that experience. But yeah, luckily I wasn't doing anything that day, so I got to just completely immerse myself in Dawntrail. It was brilliant. I also made blessedly little progress in the MSQ, despite doing it. So I told myself going in, hey, Christian, you have got a long time to do the MSQ. Like, you're not planning to raid, you're not trying to get it out of the way, you're trying to, you know, this is the thing you look forward to, this is the thing you love most, right? This is also, for the record, my first time playing Final Fantasy XIV while being current max level as a new expansion comes out. So it's my first time experiencing what it's like to then have a new expansion to go and level through from the pacing perspective of I play this game fairly regularly at endgame. And, you know, playing through from 2.0 to 6.0, I guess, there was so much story to get through that I didn't stop and unlock the sightseeing log and, you know, do the hunts and freaking go and unlock the freaking classes that are with each expansion along the way and do the raids in the right order and that kind of thing, because I was just so desperate to be current. So this time along, I am doing the side quests. I am stopping and sniffing the flowers on the way, which is why it took me 13 hours to finish the level 90 MSQ content. Literally, as I logged off, the first level 91 MSQ quest was available to me. And for a while I was doing yellow side quests. I think I'm going to put a stopper on that just because I do still want a reasonable feeling of pacing. I will go back and do those side quests on an alt when I've got nothing else to do, but for now it's just going to be the blue side quests, and you know, if it's like an Aether Current side quest, the first quest in that chain is blue and the rest are yellow. I'll do the full chain, if you know what I mean. But I've also gone and unlocked Viper, which is a job that you can go and unlock, and to give my impressions on that, I'm currently level 83, I think, so I've gained like the first 3 levels in the class basically, and I still prefer Reaper, I'll say that much, because Reaper is probably my favourite DPS class that I've played so far. The classes I've leveled to max are Dragoon, Reaper, Red Mage in that order, and I was working on Samurai before the expansion hit. And Viper is very much, it's more chaotic. It's hard to describe. It's like there's combos involved, but also kind of like RNG involved in terms of like, if you press this button, one of 2 buttons might light up, and when you press that button, one of 2 buttons might light up, but you can still kind of control the flow of it. So and you know, the different buttons that are lighting up are either going to buff you or debuff the enemy, and you want to make sure that those buffs and debuffs are kept up, and it's very much about getting into the flow of it and then keeping those buffs or debuffs going. And for a long time I felt very iffy about it, but I did eventually get to a point after doing a bunch of roulettes where I'm like, I feel like I'm familiar with what each button does now, and yeah, it's fun. I like it. It's, you know, it's no Reaper, but it's cool, and I will obviously level it to max. One thing I will say though, is I'm so focused on combat and dodging boss moves and hitting the right buttons that I don't necessarily feel the fantasy of wielding twin blades and then sticking them together to Darth Maul it for some of the moves, because I'm not typically looking at my character. So while I'm sure Tamaris looks very cool with what I'm telling him to do, I'm too busy focusing on telling him to do the right things to actually notice how cool he looks. I'm not necessarily certain there's a solution to that criticism, but there's a criticism all the same. The one other thing I will say about classes in Dawntrail is that they have adjusted Dragoon, and Dragoon is now way more fun than it was in Endwalker. Oh my god, I love the new Nestrond. It's so good. Anyway, I've done the first introductory quests to the first 2 zones, and I've done the first dungeon, and I've done the first solo duty, which was... I am really proud of myself for doing that solo duty the first time around without dying, because it was a close thing, and they really sold what they were trying to get across with that solo duty, and yeah, it's really fun. That's all I'm going to say about Dawntrail for now, but I'm very much enjoying it. I'm excited to get back to it. The pacing, or I guess the vibe so far, still very much feels like that initial, oh, we're going to, you know, Taral, and it's going to be kind of holiday vibes, but also we're helping Wooklamat, you know, we're still on that story. I think that's going to get resolved before maybe halfway through the leveling though. But, my attention span did something weird, and Dawntrail is not the only Final Fantasy game I played this week, because there's a Steam Summer Sale on right now. I don't know if you've noticed. And I swear Steam sales weren't very good for a while there, but now they're good again. Either that, or it's just because I was out of the Steam ecosystem for a few years there, and I just wasn't very motivated to get games there. But the Final Fantasy games are pretty cheap right now, so I bought Final Fantasies 9, 10, and 12. 9 just because then I have 1 all the way through 12. It would have really bugged me if I didn't have 9, although I am missing 11, but that's another story. But 10 and 12 because I played them for like 5 hours each on Game Pass a few years ago. Back when I also tried Dragon Quest on Game Pass. I never meant to use Game Pass as like a paid-for demo service, but that's essentially what it's become. GG Phil Spencer no re. And I guess that's what he would be saying to me in this scenario. But I just thought it's really nice to own them again with the Dragon Quest thing. Like, own them, install them on my external SSD, and know I can just pop my head in whenever I like and continue them at my own pace. The only real restraint now is if I can play them within a time frame that my memory's not going to forget what I was doing, you know, that kind of thing with an RPG. But out of these 3 Final Fantasies, the one I really wanted to play was Final Fantasy X, because Final Fantasy X takes place in a very tropical environment, and Dawntrail takes place in a similar kind of environment, and people have been saying there's Final Fantasy X illusions in Dawntrail. I don't know to what extent that may or may not be. It might literally just be they look similar. But I found myself thinking about Tidus and his plight, and the story hook that I was shown like 2 years ago now, and I went, shit, I really want to continue Final Fantasy X now. And so while day 1 of Dawntrail was playing it for 13 hours straight and being fully immersed, day 2 was trying to continue and being like, all I can think about is Final Fantasy X. So logging out of the critically acclaimed Final Fantasy XIV as the Dawntrail expansion has first come out, and there's plenty of MSQ to do, and installing Final Fantasy X instead and playing that. And you know what? Final Fantasy X is a really good game. Like, yeah, sure, the voice acting is weird, and the story is a little bit out there, at least in terms of the start of it. But also, it's just good. The characters are pretty immediately likable. You start with a full party pretty much within, like, the first few hours. You get given a lot of game mechanics that you wouldn't get for quite a lot later in other Final Fantasy games, at least as is my understanding. And yeah, I'm still super early on, and I don't know that I'm necessarily going to finish the game. Let's not be crazy. But yeah, I'm now juggling Dawntrail with Final Fantasy X because attention span deficit disorder, probably. I was initially frustrated by this, but hey, it's a fun way to take a break from Dawntrail. I'm going to take a break from one Final Fantasy by playing another Final Fantasy. How about that? And yeah, I have been playing Dawntrail alongside it. I haven't just parked my butt and gone to play Final Fantasy X and not come back. In fact, I'm looking forward to finishing recording this commentary, because then I'm going to spend the rest of my Sunday playing Dawntrail, probably. As for whether I can juggle Final Fantasy XIV, Final Fantasy X, and Dragon Quest XI, it's yet to be seen. But I will say, while they are of the same genre and they share many similarities, Dragon Quest XI controls pretty differently to Final Fantasy X. It has a different tone to it. I can see myself wanting to play those side by side as much as possible, maybe when I've finished the Dawntrail MSQ. So yeah, now the trick, I guess, is not to be allured by Final Fantasy XII, which is the other main Final Fantasy that I'm intrigued in playing. I know I said I was going to play through them all in order, but sod that. Final Fantasy III has kind of been a bit of a wall, and I'm not going to let some arbitrary notions of sequential completion bar me from playing them. Anyway, thank you for watching this video, and I will catch you in whatever I make next. I'm going to go back to Dawntrail.